Thank you, Junmin, for the nice introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank Cold Spring Harbor Asia and the organizers for putting together this meeting and bringing us all together. I think in these times of enormous tensions all over the world, science as a force which can unite people across the globe is really, really important. And just as we heard James Watson tell us that nothing can substitute this personal face-to-face contact. So I'm very excited to meet you all today. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to share our passion for a very nice set of biological problems that surround beautiful structures present in our cells, centrosomes and cilia. They fascinate a lot of researchers because of their importance, because of their complexity, but also, let's be honest about it, just because of their beauty. And my lab has been for many years studying microtubules, and you cannot imagine centrioles and cilia without microtubules because they are the core structures of which both centrioles, the core component of centrosomes, and cilia are built. But let's first look at microtubules. Microtubules, of course, are present in almost every cell of our body, and normally they are very dynamic. So as you can see in this movie, they grow and shrink, and this happens in almost every cell of your body, and this occurs pretty rapidly. So if this is an average cultured cell with a diameter of about maybe 40 micron or so, it takes maybe a minute or two to grow a 20 micron long microtubule, and it takes about 30 seconds to break it down. And the reason for these dynamics is that microtubules are built of tubulin dimers, which are also enzymes, as shown here by color transitions. So beta-tubulin is a molecule which can bind GTP. GTP tubulin is shown here in red, and it can hydrolyze GTP. And this is the transition is shown as transition to blue color. And so long as a microtubule grows, there is a cap of GTP-bound subunits, which stabilizes the microtubule. When the GTPs are hydrolyzed, the structure of tubulin slightly changes, the association between tubulin dimers alters, and microtubules spontaneously switch to shrinking, to depolymerization. And this formation of GTP cap depends on the microtubule growing rapidly, which you can, for example, observe in cells where GTP caps can be visualized with so-called end-binding proteins like EB1 or EB3, which specifically bind and prefer to bind to GTP-bound tubulins. So the GTP cap shown here is shown as a yellow comet here at the tip of a growing microtubule. What you see here, when a microtubule runs into the cell edge, it slows down, and then the GTP cap gradually shortens and disappears, and then the microtubule shrinks away. Now, this is a very paradoxical situation in a way, because you would think if you can grow something rapidly, you can also grow or build it slowly. Yet for microtubules, if they are built of pure tubulin, growing slowly is a problem, because then they would not be stabilized by a GTP cap and thus would not be able to grow. Yet in our cells, we have not only cytoplasmic microtubules, which grow at a rate somewhere between 5 and 25 micron per minute, but also centrioles and cilia. Centriolar microtubules elongate just half a micron in hours, maybe a whole day, 24 hours. Cilia grow a bit faster, but still quite slower. So how does this work? Of course, the obvious answer is that both centrioles and cilia contain proteins that specifically regulate their growth. And what my lab started doing is applying in vitro reconstitution assays to understand how these proteins, the names of them we know well from many cell biological and genetical studies, how they regulate microtubules. And for this, we use an in vitro assay shown here, where we grow microtubules from little pieces of microtubule lattice stabilized with slowly hydrolyzable analog of GTP called GMP-CPP. And then we can add fluorescent tubulin and different proteins. And so microtubules will grow. As you know, microtubules have a rapidly growing plus end. So here also EB3 protein is added, so you can see here the growth of the plus end. The minus end is free, can also grow here, but it grows much more slowly. You will be seeing a lot of these images called chymographs, where we draw a line through an individual microtubule and then put all images of this microtubule over the whole movie under each other. So the time is vertical in these representations. If a microtubule is not growing, so you would just see the end as a vertical line. If a microtubule plus end here grows fast, you see this displacement. Here you see that microtubule starts shrinking. That happens even more rapidly than growth. This is the plus end. The minus end here also grows, but it grows slowly. So the plus end has a long GTP cap, the minus end has a short GTP cap. So let's look first at proteins that stabilize and regulate the plus ends of centriolar microtubules, which are located at the distal centriole end. So it is known that the cap which stabilizes centriolar distal ends includes proteins like CP110 and CEP97. So we started with CP110 and purified it and added it to microtubules, and we're pleased to see that it would occasionally bind to the plus end and block it for a while, after which a microtubule would shrink, and also occasionally will block the plus end completely. The minus end, which in my images will always be shown on the left, so was not bound by CP110 at all. Unfortunately, as you can see in this image here, there was a lot of aggregation of this protein. It was very difficult to prepare. We struggled with it a lot, and ultimately realized that CP110 binds in cells pretty tightly to CEP97, which by itself doesn't bind to microtubules in our assays. And so what we did is generate a chimeric protein which would recapitulate some properties of CP110, and which would contain the C-terminus of CP110 and N-terminus of CP97, and would exclude the domains with which these two proteins bind to each other. This chimeric protein, which we called CEP97 CP110 chimera, binds to centriolar plus ends in cells, just like CP110. And this protein we could titrate nicely and showed that at low concentration, it transiently blocks the plus end, and at high concentration, it completely blocks plus end growth. We then looked at this protein using cryo-electron tomography, and this was done in collaboration with the lab of Marlene Dochterom and the very talented postdoc Vladimir Volkov, who now runs his own lab in London. And so what we saw, what Vladimir saw, was that while freely growing microtubule plus ends have these flared protofilaments, as you see here, in the presence of CEP97 CP110 chimera, the protofilaments became much more blunt, and there was a plug sitting at the plus end and interacting with it from the luminal side. We then turned to another protein which is also present in the cap of centrioles, which is called CPUP. CP110 interacts with CPUP, and I will show you the interaction in a minute. CPUP, or SAS4, is a very essential protein for centriole formation. If you mutated centrioles are not formed at all. It is a microtubule binding protein. It contains a microtubule binding domain that binds to the sides of microtubules, and a so-called PN23 domain, it's a little bit stupid name, which consists of two short helices, one of which binds to the side of beta tubulin, and the other one binds to the longitudinal interface of beta tubulin, so the site where alpha tubulin would normally bind when microtubule would polymerize. So that helical domain we called lid, because as a lid can close the tubulin protofilament and inhibit alpha tubulin binding to that site. So this is our model how the protein looks like. It binds to a lot of other centriolar partners, and for our in vitro assays, we just take the N-terminal part because the full-length CPAP is impossible to prepare in good condition from cells because this G-box make amyloid-like structures. So CPAP by itself, if you add it to microtubules, slows down microtubule growth approximately 4-fold, and also completely or almost completely prevents switches from growth to shrinkage. Interestingly, so for this you need both the lid and the sac domains and the MBD domains, and while microtubule has 13 protofilaments, so there are in principle 13 sites where a lid domain could bind, you need only 2 dimers per microtubule end to impart this slow and processive microtubule growth. So you need to block only some protofilaments, the other one would not be able to properly outgrow. Now, interesting things happen if you mix CPAP and this CP197 CEP110 chimera together. Because while this protein I showed you blocks the growth completely, and this one slows it down a bit, but not very strongly, when mixed together, they generate microtubules that grow really very slowly, approximately 6 to 12 tubulin dimer layers per minute. This is also quantified here, so if our control microtubules would grow at approximately 1 micron per minute, and CPAP will slow it down 4-fold, and the chimera itself will block it completely, you get this pretty processive, so which means no catastrophes, and very slow polymerization. It's still faster than what happens in centrioles, but we think that it's part of the mechanism to regulate this very slow elongation of centriolar microtubules. As I told you, CP110 and CPAP interact with each other, and together with the lab of Michel Steinmetz, we've mapped the interaction to 2 helical domains, which make an antiparallel coiled coil, an antiparallel coiled coil dimer. The Steinmetz lab has figured out this interaction completely. I will not bother you with the details, but knowing the interaction allowed them to generate a CPAP mutant that wouldn't bind to CP110. And using this CPAP mutant, we could then ask how important this interaction is. So for that, we knocked out endogenous CPAP and substituted it with GFP-tagged wild-type CPAP or mutant, which is just deficient in binding to CP110. The mutant could rescue the knockout phenotype, just like the wild type, but the centrioles were significantly shorter, showing that the interaction is important for centriole elongation. And so for this part, so what I told you is that the elongation of centriolar microtubules, at least in part, is regulated by 2 proteins. One of them, CP110, blocks the growth. Another one inhibits growth a bit by itself, but in combination with CP110, actually acts as a polymerase, which works against the block that CP110 imposes and allows slow but processive elongation of microtubules, which means that there are no catastrophes. We think that maybe CPAP can break apart the dimers that CP110 forms, and that's part of the mechanism, but we haven't been able to show it yet. So this is what I wanted to tell you about centriolar growth, and now I want to switch to cilia, because as you will see, the mechanisms there are a bit similar, while the players are very different. So cilia, and so here is a scheme of a primary cilium, which comes from the review by Gaio Pigina. So they have not triplets, but doublets. But at the tip of a cilia, and there will be a lot of discussion here in the meeting about the ciliary tip, because it's a very important structure. We have in primary cilia actually singlets. So our singlet, so single microtubule reconstitutions are relevant for understanding them. And the proteins we decided to look at was a group of proteins which were named ciliary tip protein module by the Roopman lab, because these proteins, they interact with each other. They don't form like a stoichiometric complex, but they all can bind to each other through different domains. And what is interesting, that mutations in these proteins cause ciliopathies, mostly recessive neurodevelopmental ciliopathies like Joubert syndrome, with the major phenotype as hindbrain malformation, so a very characteristic feature of brain development defect, as well as some defects on the retina and the kidney, liver, and also sometimes polydactyly, so which are mostly all associated with signaling defects, particularly Hedgehog signaling. And so what we did is purify all these 5 proteins, which are called CEP104, CSPP, and Togoram. CEP104 is also known as FAP256. So these 3 are all microtubule binders. The other 2, ARMC9 and C66, we regard more as scaffolds, although this one also can interact with microtubules. And among these proteins, CEP104 and Togoram1, or cresserin, have very characteristic tubulin binding domains known as TOG domains. CSPP doesn't have TOG domains. We have characterized it a couple of years back. It only has helical domains and unstructured regions, and interestingly, it has a very short specific helical domain which targets it to the lumen of the microtubule. When you add to microtubules just CSPP, it induces pauses, prevents catastrophe, so these microtubules, they keep growing, but this growth is interrupted by pauses. CEP104, or a FAP256 homologue in mammals, has, as I already said, a single TOG domain, and this has been characterized quite extensively and shown to bind to tubulin dimers, so CEP104 was predicted to be a microtubule polymerase. Yet in our assays, it doesn't bind by itself to microtubules very well, but if you add EB3, which binds here to the C-terminus of CEP104, it completely blocks microtubule plasma growth, just like CP110. CEP104 interacts with other proteins, with CSPP, CCD66 as well, and any of these 3 binding partners can help to target it to microtubule plasmans. You get a block of microtubule growth, but although microtubules are blocked, they sometimes depolymerize, but very, very slowly, which means that CEP104 is not only an inhibitor of microtubule growth, but it is also a stabilizer of a blocked end, because this block end, unlike a free end, which you see here, which depolymerizes catastrophically, once CEP104 binds there, it's pretty stable. Now, Togoram or cresserin has 4 TOG domains, so this is really reminiscent of a microtubule polymerase. Yet when you add it to microtubules by itself, it again is quite disappointing, because it slows down microtubule growth a bit, induces some rescues, so switches from shortening to growth, but it's quite unremarkable. Yet when you mix Togoram and CEP104, then again some kind of magic happens, and you again get these episodes of slow and very processive growth. You can see it here in the histograms. So not all microtubules grow at this slow pace, and it's a bit faster than with the centriolar proteins, but it's still like about maybe 20 tubulin dimer layers per minute, so quite slow. And if we now mix all 5 proteins, then we get extremely robust slow growth. All at the same speed. We can vary the concentrations here. We always get more or less the same speed, which is very consistent for every microtubule in our assay. And this slow polymerization, which is in this graph is complicated, but it's actually not very complicated. So bright green is fast growth, light green is slow growth. So all conditions where you see a lot of light green means there is a lot of slow growth. You see that when we take the 5 protein combination and then leave out togram, so this one, then there is just pausing, no slow growth, which means that in our conditions, to have this slow growth, we need togram. If we leave out other proteins, the system is pretty okay. Only from time to time, we get episodes of fast growth, which means that the mix of all 5 makes it either blocked or slow growth without fast growth events. So it's a robust system. We looked at these microtubules with all 5 proteins, or actually 6, including EB proteins together, on microtubules by cryo-electron tomography. This was already done in Utrecht in collaboration with Stuart Howe's lab. And so what we saw is that, again, as you see here, we get blunt protofilaments and the plug. These plugs are more pretty than the centriolar ones. We call them champagne corks. They have kind of the same shape. And again, it's similar because we have proteins that interact from the luminal side. So if I now put together the 2 studies, so what you see is that the players are completely different. So here are these proteins from the ciliary tip. And I just told you about the centriolar proteins. But in both cases, there is a tip blocker, either CP110 or CEP104. And in both cases, there is a polymerase that by itself is unremarkable, CPAP or togram, but it can work against the block and allow this processive slow polymerization. And so together the proteins impose slow growth. They form plugs, and they work from 2 sides. So from the inside, as here, we know the CSPP inside. We know that EB and probably CCDC66 are outside. We don't know where these guys are, probably part of the plug. And they make protofilaments blunt. So we think that these are important features of how the plus ends of centrioles and cilia are regulated. Okay, now I would like to switch gears again and talk a little bit now from in vitro. I will go to a cellular system, and I will switch from the plus ends to the organization of microtubules, which is another favorite topic in my lab. And for that, I will switch to a system that will be familiar to many of you. Airway epithelial cells, which make these beautiful multi-ciliated structures. So it's a great pity that the second keynote speaker is not here today, because his talk was actually all about them. And I don't have as much expertise at all in this system. We became interested in it as a system where we could study ciliary growth. For example, to be able to see the proteins I just described, how they form cilia, but we are not there yet. And today, instead, I will talk a little bit about microtubule organization in these cells. So these cells can be cultured quite easily. These cultures exist already for more than 30 years. You can grow this airway epithelium on air-liquid interface, and they differentiate nicely and form 2 main types of cells, goblet cells and multiciliated cells. And to study microtubules in these cells, we use expansion microscopy. So tomorrow we will hear an amazing talk from Virginie Hamel, who is one of the people who really were foundational for setting up expansion microscopy as a technique to study centrioles and cilia. We use it, and we use a type of one of the protocols which has been co-developed by our neighbors, the Kapitein lab. It allows you approximately 8-fold expansion. And the beauty of this technology is that it allows you not so much even to improve the X and Y of your microscopy, but because it greatly improves the Z resolution, you can basically map, even in a complicated cell with about 300 microtubules, each individual microtubule, so you can trace it from the plus end to the minus end. So this is really a very nice technique. And another beauty of this technology is that it allows you to combine the specific stainings like a tubulin stain with general protein stains like maleimide or NHS. In this case, these protein stains, for example, allow you to visualize cilia and their basal bodies. So it's a very powerful technique, and in this way, we could get a good view on microtubules in these cells and confirm that in these epithelial cells, most microtubules originate from the structure called the basal foot, which is of course very familiar to many of you. This is the subdistal appendage of the basal body of the cilium. It has these basal bodies have mostly one basal foot. And so each one of them produces approximately 3 to 5 microtubules, and these together form this large array of microtubules you just saw, and also the apical network of microtubules, which helps, among other things, to position the basal body and orient them with respect to each other, so that you get this ordered beating of this multiciliated bundle. So we became very interested in the question, which proteins are nucleating microtubules at the basal foot? And what we decided to do for that is very similar to how has been done for particularly centrioles, but also for the basal bodies of cilia. And this is to average the signals of different proteins using expansion microscopy. We developed a computational averaging protocol where we automatically detect a basal body using the general protein stain, the NHS signal. Then we center the basal bodies, extract them. We have to straighten them because cilia, when they move, they bend, so some of them are in a bent position in some cells. Then we orient them using the basal foot, and then we iteratively average them. And then we define some anchor points like the proximal and the transition zone. And then we scale the basal bodies in X, Y, and in Z, and then we can combine multiple images. In this protocol, we have not imposed any ninefold symmetry. So we just orient all the basal bodies on the basal foot, and then using this protocol, average them. And using this protocol, we obtained a map of different proteins on the basal bodies. So, for example, centriolin, one of the components of the basal foot, CEP164, so this is the distal appendages. So some of them clearly have a very nice ninefold symmetric structure. And we also looked at different components sitting inside the lumen of the basal bodies, and also on the in different positions of the outside. So you can find this movie online, so if you are interested, and I will skip it now and just will show you some highlights from the what we found. So first of all, we were interested in these proteins which, and this is from Virginie's paper, so CP110 and CPUP, which she also nicely showed in her work, are at the distal end of the centriole. And interestingly, in the basal bodies, these two partners separate. We find some CP110 inside the basal body. We were very surprised because there is like a ton of papers which show that CP110 needs to be degraded and should disappear for cilia to form. We find a very consistent signal here inside the basal body. We could very well reproduce what has been shown for normal centrioles with the same antibodies. CPAP is present around the basal body and enriched at the basal foot. We were quite curious about it because there is a controversial line of studies suggesting that CPAP is part of the pericentriolar material and could be also involved in nucleating microtubules somehow. As I mentioned, it is a controversial opinion, but we were interested to see that, that there was quite a lot of CPAP on the basal foot where microtubules are nucleated. Our main goal was not, like many of you in this audience, to try to find out from which proteins the basal body is built. That's really a structural biology problem, and there is a lot of outstanding expansion microscopy also done in this area. Our interest was to look where the microtubule nucleators are. So the gamma Turk is present inside the basal body, just like in centrioles, and very abundantly at the tip of the basal foot, together with its binding partner NED1, also present in both locations. Now, as some of you might know, the localization of gamma tubulin or gamma tubulin ring complex inside the centriole is regulated by augmen, which binds to NED1. We also see augmen in the lumen of the basal body and also on the basal foot. So we're very excited about that. Some other proteins which are involved in organizing pericentriolar material in centrosomes and ultimately anchoring gamma Turk to these centrosomes are interestingly not present at the basal foot at all. So particularly CEP192 and CDK5-RAP2, which is the best studied activator of gamma Turk, seems to be almost excluded from the basal foot, although it's present around the basal body. But that's not where the microtubules grow from. So ninin is an important part of the basal foot and also is present as a plug at the proximal end. From the microtubule regulators, we saw CLASP at the basal foot, SAGE-TOG, another activator of gamma tubulin ring complex, interestingly was present in the area of distal appendage and not where the microtubules are nucleated. So just to summarize, our interest was in the basal foot, and these were the proteins we found there. So our next goal was to try to get rid of them, to knock them down or out, to study whether they are indeed important for nucleating microtubules. And for that, what we did, and that's also, I think, will be very useful for this community, we have generated human airway epithelial basal cell lines which are immortalized. And so we could culture them for a long time and generate either knockdowns or knockouts. Genetic manipulation in this system is still painful. So if we do a depletion, we need to do it for like 3-4 weeks. So in some cases, we could make knockouts, like in the case of ninin. In some cases, we had to do depletions, like in cases of NED1 or augmen. Augmen was our favorite, our best candidate, so we put a lot of effort in that one. Sadly, what we saw is that so we could either knock out or deplete these three, and there was no phenotype, among them, there was no phenotype either with ninin or with augmen. So while with NED1, which is a kind of an adapter for gamma Turk, we could see very clear reduction of gamma tubulin intensity, and as you can see here, a very clear reduction in the density of the apical microtubule network that is also just as these vertically located microtubules are nucleated and attached to the basal feet of the basal bodies. So we were very surprised that we couldn't find any phenotype with Ninian. We don't understand it. And now we have to either look for redundancies in the system or look for other regulators that are present at the basal foot. So I don't have, unfortunately, a full answer on how the basal foot activates gamma tubulin to nucleate and anchor microtubules. And so with this, I would like to conclude that in multiciliated cells, basal bodies not only organize the cilia, but also are responsible for organizing the cytoplasmic microtubule array. And using these expansion microscopy combined with computational averaging, we could identify candidates for microtubule nucleation and anchoring and study them, but we are not there yet. We haven't solved the problem. So far, we only know that NED1 and gamma TERC are important at that location to organize microtubules. And for that, with this, I would like to stop. This is my lab. It looks huge, but actually it's not that big. Half of these people are master students. Every year my lab takes approximately 7 master students. We train them for a year. I would also like to thank our collaborators. We have many, but these are the ones all in the Netherlands which were important for this talk. Utrecht University, Lucas Kapitein has helped us to develop expansion microscopy and apply it to airway epithelium. Stuart Hose is the guy with whom we now do electron EM tomography. Marlene Dochterom, with whom we started on EM. And then our collaborators in the medical centers, Ronald Roopman and Jeffrey Bakeman, who kind of introduced us to the beautiful systems of cilia and also the exciting world of ciliopathies. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I think I'm still on time, and I will be delighted to take questions.
Timing perfect. Okay. You've got questions?
Susan Dutcher, Washington University in St. Louis. I was wondering what kind of microtubules and post-translational modifications were in your preps when you were looking at the ciliary tips, and whether polyglutamylation or glycination or all these other ones are affecting your binding.
Yeah, this is a very fair question. We just use brain tubulins, so it has some polyglutamylated microtubules, so some polyglutamylated tubulin in the preps. There is no glycylated tubulin to my knowledge, or at least not much in these preps. So it's completely fair that, of course, for formation of centrioles and cilia, these post-translational modifications might be important, with the emphasis on might. And I will explain why. Because post-translational modifications occur normally on microtubules and not on tubulin, while tubulin addition occurs by adding tubulin. And the centriole, for example, if you consider it, sits in a place which is very strongly concentrating soluble tubulin, alpha-beta tubulin. So most of the subunits that would be added there to the very tip, and we are now studying the very, very tip. That's what we are interested in. We are not studying the microtubule lattice. We're not studying the doublets, unfortunately, and we are not studying to what would happen to these microtubules afterwards. We are just looking at how you can stabilize the tip itself while it is being built. And so I believe that for that, using tubulin, which maybe is not as modified as ciliary or centriolar tubulin, is still okay. I'm sure that if we would use other modified, tubulins, the results would be somewhat different, but that's something that would need to be explored.
Hello.
Hi,
No,
Frank.
very beautiful work. I just wonder, have you checked the dynamic of those stereotype protein during cytogenesis? Where did they go? Did they go together, or they? Do they go in the very beginning of the cellulogenesis, or they come later?
We haven't looked, so at the ciliary tip proteins, we haven't looked in cells yet at all. So we are planning to do it. But we haven't, basically cell biology of ciliary tip proteins so far has been done by others. The only contribution of my lab has ever been that when years ago we've been collaborating with Lotte Pedersen, we have shown that EB3, so Lotte has shown that EB1 homologue in clammy is abundantly present at the tips of flagella. And what we have shown together with her is that an airway system, EB3, is abundantly present at the distal tips of cilia in multiciliated cells. With stainings, we have seen enrichment of CSPP1 there, but we haven't checked others yet. And so one of the things, that's one of the reasons why we have developed this in a more immortalized system. So my hope now is that we will be able to tag these proteins endogenously using bright tags like Stay Gold or something like that, and would actually be able to see their dynamics. I'm very aware also that in motile cilia, for example, in Tetrahymena, these proteins I was talking about, sorry, no. Let me see. So I show them here as a module, as also defined by the Roopman lab. In some particularly single-celled organisms, it has been shown that, for example, these two sit on A and B tubule, so they don't have always to be together in the complex as well. So the whole thing is much, much more complicated, but I think that with our work, at least we now have a little bit of idea what these proteins can do. That's what biochemistry can give you. So, and what they actually do, we'll have to figure out.
Yeah, Oliver Black, Dublin. Lovely talk. I was wondering, from your lovely images of the blocking of at the caps from your cryo-EM images, it sort of looked like it could be quite a firm complex there. I mean, do you think the growth, albeit slow, does the whole clogging complex come off, or do you think periodically?
I think it's being pushed up. Some of it exchanges. So, I mean, if I go to the model, if I go to the model here, so EB protein exchanges, it goes in and out fast. We know this, it always does. So this interaction, it binds to CEP104. This interaction is very transient. All interactions of unbinding proteins to its partners are transient. This one, I think, by itself also exchanges quite rapidly. So we haven't frapped all of them systematically. CSPP is pretty slow. It's luminal and it has problems getting in and out. So you shouldn't see it as one solid complex, as a ribosome or dinactin. What you should, if you are familiar with the focal adhesion science, I don't know if people here know what focal adhesions are. So these are the structures which allow cells to attach to the substrate. So they are built of a lot of proteins which interact with each other. Yet when you frap them, each one of them would have their own life, their own dynamics, although the structure itself kind of moves. So I think this is also what happens here. But at least some of the proteins don't exchange fast, and I think some of them maybe are kind of processively moving with the tip, while the tip is gradually growing. So one important thing is, I told you that the protofilaments become blunt. We don't know whether this is a cause or a consequence of slow growth, because you could see it in two ways. You could think, okay, these flared protofilaments are actually a good place to add a new tubulin, and when they grow slowly, that doesn't happen. But it could also be that you really kind of put a lid on the tubulin here, and that's why they get more blunt. We don't know.
Hi, Anna.
Yes. I was intrigued by this CPAP, that you have two molecules, and that having two of those prevents the catastrophe.
Yeah.
Do you have a model for that, how that would work with only two on the 13?
Yeah, so the model is basically that you stabilize protofilaments from the side in a little bit, and that you don't need to stabilize the whole thing. So that if you stabilize some of the protofilaments, Where did I have it? So let's say there would be one dimer here and another one somewhere else. That would be enough so that the protofilaments that start shrink, they regrow again. And in this way, you can preserve the structure. We have shown previously that there is a kinesin, which is not part of cilia, but which is important for regulating microtubules in immune cells and in the nervous system. And there a single dimer is actually enough to inhibit growth, but also to arrest the polymerization for a while. So you don't need, to block growth of a microtubule, actually blocking one protofilament is already enough. If you block it long enough and doesn't stabilize the rest, microtubule will shrink ultimately. With stabilizing, it's a bit more complicated. But I must say that this MBD, this microtubule binding domain, is non-structured domain. We don't fully understand it. So it could also be possible that it maybe even interacts. Because what typically happens with microtubule binding proteins is that when they have these unstructured domains, they interact with tubulin tails. Because tubulin is a globular protein, and we always draw microtubules as this kind of naked tubes, but they are hairy. They are extremely hairy tubes. They have a lot of, every tubulin molecule has a tail which sticks out and quite far. So this is all where all these modifications are that Susan was just talking about. And so maybe these unstructured proteins, or maybe they also can span more than one protofilament across the whole thing.
Hi, Anna. Very nice talk. I do have a very short question. About the ciliary tip complex, having a plug on the tubule, microtubule. What about the MIPS? Like, how would you imagine, like, when and how they are, incorporated into the ciliary of the microtubule?
Yeah, so I think the MIPS are a huge mystery. Guy Pigino now argues that there is this system where you make a little hole in the microtubule and then the MIPS go into the hole. So that's one beautiful model. The one MIP we have worked with, oh no, I'm going the wrong direction again. Sorry, yeah, this one, CSPP. So this one was, so it's a MIP. It's by itself, it just binds in the lumen. This was studied extensively. And what we saw is that for it to bind, microtubule needs to slow down. So when the microtubules grow very, very fast, it doesn't get in efficiently. So if you make microtubule grow slower, then it decorates it more densely from inside. So also part of the mechanism of binding MIPS could be indeed also this slow growth by itself, that you build the structure so slowly that you have enough time to put things in. And it has been shown by Dave Oddy already like 25 years ago that diffusing in the microtubule lumen, if you have decent affinity for the surface of the lumen, is almost zero, because there are it's a too confined space with too many binding sites. So diffusion, alpha-theta acetylation enzyme can apparently diffuse, but the MIPS, I think, will not diffuse very far. So you have to build them in somehow while you are building the whole thing, or indeed make holes at the lattice.
So it was reported that overexpression of CPAP would cause longer centriole-like structure. So I was wondering how this, your finding fit into this phenotype.
Yeah, so you can also see this in this slide. I didn't emphasize it, but thank you for asking this question. So what we did in this system is knock out endogenous CPAP and overexpress CPAP wild type just 1.5 times. So it's a very, very minor overexpression. And you can see that that already gives you a distribution of centriole length with some badly over-elongated centrioles. We unfortunately couldn't manage to introduce the mutation in the gene of CPAP. I tried very, very hard, but that particular site in CPAP is untargetable by CRISPR. So that's what we had to do. So indeed, it's completely true that overexpressing CPAP, even a little bit, gives you overly long centrioles. And I think that what it tells us that indeed you have this, that CPAP is a polymerase, just as has been suggested. It's only a slow polymerase which works against the cap. But you don't have to be very fast to overgrow like to 1 or 2 microns. So it still grows them very, very slowly, but it's basically the stoichiometry of the cap. And I'm absolutely not saying that it's only stoichiometry of these two. There's probably more regulators there. We're pretty sure there are more regulators there. But the stoichiometry of CPAP as a polymerase at the distal end of the centriole is completely crucial to prevent the overgrowth of centrioles.
So I have one question. So as cellular tips, there are 6 proteins that are modulating microtubule dams. Why do you think there's so many that work same spot to control celiac growth?
Yeah, by the way, so please don't think that there are only 6. Yeah? These are the 6 we reconstituted based on the fact that they all interact with each other. There's, for example, also KIF7, which is not part of this interactome, so we haven't taken it along, but it's also there. So there are more proteins there for sure. So there is a kinesin 4, there are also kinesin 13, so there are many more proteins, but this was already quite a tough reconstitution. So why do you need so many? I think part of it is in the complexity of the tip, because they do not only just regulate growth, but they also regulate connections to signaling molecules, the whole architecture of the tip, so they have other function as well. And the other reason, which I think is when in nature we'll find something very complicated and also evolutionary conserved, it usually means that it can be regulated in many different complicated ways so that you can target it from different sides. And the third thing, which I think is also important, is that the fact that there are many proteins there, or at least several, makes the whole system robust, because like CPAP is essential for making centrioles. No CPAP, no SAS4 is one of the most basic mutants that completely eliminates your centrioles. These guys are all ciliopathy proteins, which means that you can still get quite far in making your cilia without each one of them, and which means that there is quite a lot of redundancy in the system here, and to make it probably flexible, but just also to make it robust. And that's why we were actually pleased that our reconstitutions showed that indeed we can, from this reconstitution, leave out at least some of them quite easily without completely blocking the phenotype. We observed the slow growth. So again, so we saw these features of robustness of the system.
Any more questions? It's not, let's end this session, and let's welcome Anna again for her wonderful talk.
Thank you.
So now perhaps you can go to the bar.